on the In Memoriam system, and then I'll be handing over to Gary later on. The In Memoriam system is part of the Donman system, so anyone that's got Donman has the In Memoriam system, so all of you should be able to use that. It's been a part of the system for a long time. It was originally done for gifts in lieu of flowers at a funeral. So if somebody had died and the next of kin said, look, don't send flowers, make a donation to XYZ organisation, you could record those donations through the In Memoriam system. However, in more recent times, this has been extended so that we can do more types of gift in lieu things like weddings, birthdays, anniversaries, etc. And essentially it's all the same. There's just a few slight subtle differences between the two, but it's essentially the same thing. Now, the advantages of using the In Memoriam system is that when you process your donations, you can record the name of the deceased person, or in the case of the more recent gifts in lieu, the person that's actually celebrating the event, the wedding, the birthday, the anniversary. So that can then go out as part of the letter saying, thank you for your donation in memory of Mr. Fred Bloggs, or in lieu of a gift to Joe Bloggs. The other thing that you can also do with the In Memoriam system is you can generate letters to the next of kin showing them a list of those donors that have contributed instead of sending flowers or giving you a gift. So those last two things are the benefits of using the In Memoriam over on top of just using a normal donation campaign. What we'll be running through is how to set up the In Memoriam system if it's not already set up, and then how to process donations using the In Memoriam system, and then finally we'll be looking at how to send those letters to the next of kin. So I'm now going to pop into Donman. Now, the first thing that we need before we do anything else is we need a campaign to be set up as a special type of campaign, and that's an In Memoriam campaign. Now, there's a very good chance that probably all of you have got at least one campaign set up that way. In the case of gifts in lieu of a birthday or anniversary, it's probably worthwhile having a second In Memoriam campaign, simply so that you can have a different letter automatically associated with gifts in lieu, as opposed to those that were actually in memory of somebody. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go into the campaign setup menu, and we'll have a quick look at a campaign code. So I've got one set up, and it's just in Mem. So this is our typical one that's been going on probably forever. You can see down in here it says this is a Memoriam campaign. Now, when you're setting up a campaign, when you press enter on the end date, you get a pop-up screen where you can tell it what type of campaign it is. So we've said no to most of those questions, but you'll notice down here it says, is it an In Memoriam campaign? And I've said yes to that. So what that means is that when we're processing donations to this campaign, we'll be asked for a little bit of extra information about the person who's died or who the gift is in lieu of. So once we've got that, as well as that, I'll just skip through all of that. Down in our letters, you can see that I've defaulted all letters to this, all receipt letters to this campaign to a letter called _in mem. Now, I've also set up another campaign called In Lieu, and essentially it's also an In Memoriam campaign. And when we look at the letters, in this case, it's a second letter called In Lieu, because we don't want to be sending letters to people saying, oh, sorry for the loss of your husband, Mr. Fred Bloggs, when it's actually his birthday. So having got the campaign set up, the next thing that we're going to have a look at is the actual In Memoriam types. And to do that, we're going to go back to the Start menu, and we're going to go to the In Memoriam system here. Now, I should also note that as we go through this, there will be a lot of things that I will probably skip over fairly quickly because that's not the topic that we're discussing, and I'll just be looking at those things particularly pertinent to the In Memoriam system. So down at the bottom, we've got this In Memoriam type codes. Now, when this is first set up, this facility wasn't there, and all In Memoriam donations were Memoriam. But now when we have a look at the list, in this case I've got birthday and Memoriam. Now, Memoriam is the real Memoriam ones. I've got birthday, but if I want to set up something for anniversary, I can type in anniverse. I need 8 characters. I think that's 8 characters, and I'll just say anniversaries. Okay, so now when I look at my list, I can now process 3 different types of in memoriam donations. Now, later on, when we come to look at the actual letters that go to the next of kin, for each of those memoriam types that we have set up there, there needs to be 2 letters that can be used when sent to the next of kin. And we'll have a look at that in a bit more detail when we actually get to the last section. But so when we set that up though, I've set one up as anniverse. So I actually need to create 2 letters or Word documents in the DM work directory called anniverse 1 and anniverse 2. Anniverse 1 will be the first letter that gets sent to any of the next of kins, and in the case of where it's an actual anniversary, the next of kin is really describing the person having the anniversary. The second one, anniverse 2, will be the second letter that gets sent, so second or subsequent letter. So if we end up sending more than 1 letter to them with lists of contributors in there, then the second letter will go out after the first one. So the first one goes out the first time, and then after that, anniverse 2 would go out for each of the others. Now, I haven't set one of those up, but we could simply do that. We'll have a look at that a little bit later. So now that we've got the in memoriam type, the next thing that we need to discuss is the next of kin record, or sometimes it's called the relative record. In the case of a true in memoriam donation, the next of kin is actually the next of kin. It would be the husband, the wife, the son, daughter, or whatever it is, the relation to the person that's died. Now, sometimes you will know in advance when you're going to be starting to get some of these donations. A number of organisations have handout cards that they give to funerals, so that if someone says, look, we don't want flowers, but can you suggest anyone that we could make contributions to, they can give out cards. Those cards can then be distributed to those who attend the funeral, and those people can then send that information in. Now, in those circumstances, you'll probably be notified by the funeral home, or maybe even by the next of kin, in advance that you should be expecting those donations. So under those circumstances, you can create a next of kin record prior to receiving any donations. At other times, you may not know anything at all until a donation comes in, and even then you may not know much about the next of kin, but over a period of time you might learn a little bit more. In order for you to be able to generate letters to the next of kin, any donation that goes towards a particular deceased person or someone having an anniversary or a birthday needs to be tied into one of these next of kin records. So it's important that you know how to create those, and when you are processing an in memoriam donation, that you actually make use of the appropriate code. If you know in advance the actual details of the next of kin, or even some basic details about the deceased, then you can create a next of kin record straight away. Now, again, I'm already in the in memoriam system, so I'm going to go to Create Edit Memoriam Record. So what we see on the screen here is the details that we record about the next of kin. Now, as I said, you may not know all the details initially. If you don't know too much, but you do expect a number of donations coming into this deceased, then create a code with as much detail as you can. That way you can tie the donations together, and then as more information comes to light, you can update this record. So if I pick one that's already in there perhaps, I'm not sure, this one here, I've created one for John Be Good, and I've put the BD at the end to recognize that this is actually for a birthday. Typically the code that you would use would be based upon the deceased person's name, if it's a true in memoriam, or the person that's celebrating whatever the event is. So in this case I've gone with Be Good as the surname, comma John, and as I said, I've added BD to indicate that this is actually a birthday, just in case John dies later on and we want to make sure that we use the correct record. You can see we've got information there. In this case, John, or Johnny, is a donor, and you can see we've got donor number 1 there. And when we create, or when I created this earlier on, by putting the donor number 1 there, it's actually copied all the details about John from his donor record, so it saves you having to enter all the same information that you already know. If, however, the person wasn't already on the system, we could simply create a new code. So I'll call one Mr. Sample, and I'll do Fred Sample. He doesn't have a donor number as far as I know, so I'll ignore that. Now, I've created the 3 Memoriam types, so I can say what type of record it is. So I'll say that he's died, so I'll do it as an in memoriam, but obviously I could have picked one of the others. I'm going to say that it's active because we're only just creating that, and I'll say that now the rest of, or most of what I'm about to type in here is going to be the next of kin details. So I'll say that his son was Mr. Ian Sample, and I don't really know too much about him. I'll just put unknown, Vic. Don't know any of that sort of details. Now, the last letter sent initially will be blank, and that's the way that it should be. When you actually send the next letter to this particular person, giving them a list of donors, it will update that to say 1 or 2. That being indicating, when you do it the first time, it'll say 1, and from then on, it will then say 2, and in the next field here, it will actually tell you when that letter was last sent. You've also got the date that we added them to the system, so that's got today's date there. We also have an option here if we want to optionally create a donor record for them. So if I were to say yes to that, then it would create the next available donor record for Mr. Ian Sample, and that would then be saved onto the system. Now, this next part here, where it says information about the remembered person, you need to get this correct, in particular the relation part. So I'm going to say that it's Mr. Fred Sample, and I'm going to say that it's the father. Now, if you're not careful, you might put the son there, but the letter's going to go out to Mr. Ian Sample, and it's going to reference his father, Mr. Fred Sample. And you'll notice that it says, used in letters, use lowercase. So I've put father in lowercase as opposed to uppercase. Otherwise, when you use that within your letter, it's going to look a little funny. And I'm going to say that he died today. I can put a comment about the particular deceased person or a general comment there. And if Ian were to say, look, I would like this money directed towards cancer support or towards this or towards that, then underneath here, I can put a default ledger code. And that default ledger code will override the default that we have on our campaign when we set that up. Okay, so that's one way of creating the next of kin record. So if you know in advance, you can create that so by the time you come to process your donation, it's there, it's ready to be picked. Okay, the next thing that we're going to have a look at is actually the processing of the donations. Now, entry of donations is not what I'm here for. I'm only going to talk about the in memoriam system, so a lot of that stuff I'll just simply skip over. But what we're going to do now is we're going to go in and we're going to create a donation batch of 3 donations. Okay, so yes to a new batch. It's going to be 3 donations. I'm lazy, I'm just going to make them all pre-banked, and I'll say there's $300. Okay, so now I need my donor. So let's suppose I've had a donation from, well, donor number 51. Is that Audrey Hepburn? Yep. So Audrey is going to make a donation in memory of somebody. So she's going to give us $100. It'll be one part. I'll just do pre-bank as the pay method. Bank no, but we want to say yes to receipt. Okay, so I'm going to do this in memory of Mr. Sample. So I'll do it as in mem. Now, normally speaking, with most campaigns, it would skip over the relative field. However, you'll see in this case how it's now stopped at that field. So I can select from the drop-down list there, Mr. Sample, Fred. So that, when I press enter, it's going to come up and say, well, okay, who's that in memory of? And because I've already entered that information, it's automatically come up with Mr. Fred Sample. Whatever is in this field here is what will go out in the thank you letter to, in this case, Audrey Hepburn. So that it'll say, thank you for your donation in memory of Mr. Fred Sample. Okay, ledger code, let's pick the letter that we want, the in-mem one. Soft credit to, I won't worry about, no comment. Okay, so that's my first donation. Now the second donation I'll do it from somebody else, Bill Gates. He's going to give us a donation. Okay, so he's going to give us $150. It's going to be pre-bank again. Now, I'll do it to in-mem, but I could have, of course, done it to that gift in lieu campaign. Now, it's come up with Fred Sample, but what if it's not there? And if the people that you want, if you check the drop-down list there, you look through and you can't find the person you want, so obviously they haven't been done, you'll notice down the bottom it says press F5 to add edit relatives. So if I press F5 now, again, it comes up with the same screen. So I can then fill out that detail with anybody new. Now I'm not going to do that because we've already seen how to create one of these records. So I'll go again with Fred Sample and same details. Okay, so one last record. Who's done number 4? Catherine Hepburn, are you? Okay, so she's going to give us $50. Again, it's pre-bank. Oops, I'll get rid of that. In-mem. Now, let's suppose that we get something completely out of the blue. We don't know anything about them at all. We think it's probably only going to be a one-off letter or one-off donation to somebody that no one's ever heard of. If I leave the relative code blank, I can still type in, you know, Mr. Murray Neil, and that can then be used on the letter. So when the receipt goes out to Catherine Hepburn, it will say, thank you for your donation in memory of Mr. Murray Neil. However, because we have not given it a relative code, that will not ever be picked up by any of the letters that go to the next of kin. So if you do expect to be able to tie a number of these things together, that's why you need to create one of those relative codes. Okay. All right. So I've now closed my batch. Now because, oh, I don't know why it's gone back to that. Because I've done them all as pre-bank, I can skip the banking credit card listing and go directly to the create receipt merge data file. So I'll just run through this fairly fast. Okay, so I'll go yes to read only, yes to pick up my data from there. And just like any other letters, we're just going to simply do our mail merge. Finish and merge, edit individual, okay to that. Okay, so here's our first letter to Audrey Hepburn. Thanks for your donation in memory of Mr. Fred Sample. Okay, again to Mr. Gates, Mr. Fred Sample, and then the final one says in memory of Mr. Murray Neil. Okay, so there's nothing particularly special about this really, apart from the fact that you've got access to certain fields there. If I close this down without saving, when I'm back on here, if I quickly have a look at the list of merge fields that are available, you'll see that there's a few there that relate to in memoriam. There's one that's called in memory, this one here. That's the one that has the person's name. So in this case, Mr. Fred Sample is the merge field for in memory. And if I look a bit further down, you've got rel title, rel name 1, rel s name. So if you wanted to, you could make your letter include that person, the next of kin's name. So you could say, thank you for your donation in memory of Mr. Fred Sample. We will let whoever, Mr. Ian Sample, know of your kind gift or something along those lines. If you want, it's simply there for you. Okay, so what we need to do now is we need to finish off our end of day. Because until those donations are being processed through end of day, we can't pick those up as part of the next of kin letter. So we always have to run our ledger posting report, so I'll just quickly run that to the screen. Okay, nothing special there. And, oh dear. And then we'll just go back to our end of day update. Now, I'm going to do a print to file so that it doesn't try and print it anywhere. There won't be anything particularly special about the results of that. It just looks like any other donation. I need to close that down, don't I? Okay, Now that we've actually processed those through the end of day, we can now go back to the in memoriam system. If we have a quick look at that particular one that we've used a couple of times there, Mr. Sample. Okay, if I click on the dollar, you can see those donations that we've processed already. Total number is 2 for a total of $250 so far. Also in this, we've got the Memoriam code breakdown report. So if we go into there, I can say, look, I don't want particular relatives or particular Memoriam types. I don't care about the campaigns. I'll do this from the beginning of this month, 13 through to blank. I'll say grand total no, subtotal no, and I'll just do a print preview. Okay, so there's a few others there that I've already processed earlier on, and then we've got those two there for Mr. Ian Sample, again showing you all the detail with a total of $250 for 2 transactions. Now, the last thing that we need to talk about is the letter that goes to the next of kin. Now, there's a couple of different ways of doing this. It all uses the same program, but depending on the number of donations that you get and for the number of next of kins, you might choose to do this one of the 2 different ways. If you're getting a large number of in memoriam donations across a large number of different deceased or people having birthdays, whatever, it becomes very difficult to keep track of when donations stop coming in for a particular person. Under those circumstances, you would probably do this on a periodic basis, maybe monthly, maybe every 2 months. And so you would simply know, okay, the last time around that, we ran it up to the 30th of September, so I'm going to run it from the 1st of October to the end of October or end of November. If, however, you're only getting small numbers and it's quite easy to keep track of when you haven't seen any donations from Mr. Fred Bloggs or Ian or Fred Sample for a long time, then what you might do is at some point like that you say, oh, nothing's come in, let's send a next of kin letter to Mr. Ian Sample on behalf of his father. Either way, to do that, what we need to do is we go into the Create in Memoriam data file. Okay, so if you're using it on a periodic basis, then you would specify the date range. Now I'm going to do this for the current month, so 01, 9, 13 through to today, that's fine. If we were just doing it for 1 or 2 relatives that we know we haven't had donations for in a few days or weeks, then we could say yes at this point, and then we could select those particular codes relevant to the deceased or the celebrators that we want to look at. I'm just going to leave that blank. So again, we can select by different memoriam types. So at the moment we've got birthday, anniversary and memoriam. Those ones that I put in were in memoriam. So I'm going to do this so that we can at least see what's going to go out to Mr. Ian Sample. Now this is where you need to have set up those letters in advance. We haven't set up any letters for anniversary, so it's a good thing that we didn't process any donations to the anniversary type next of kin. I don't care about particular campaigns, so I'm going to ignore that. Now it comes to this bit where it says, do you want to do a trial first? Now when you're first setting this up, or you're perhaps having a bit of a play, I would advise you to say yes to that, because when you actually run it for real, it's actually going to update the next of kin details with the last letter sent and the date that it was sent. So if we're doing this, say, for the first time for Mr. Ian Sample as the son, and we do it once, and then we say, oh, actually, we need to add something or we need to do it differently, when you run it the second time, it's automatically going to specify to get the second letter, not the first letter. And therefore, it's going to be saying something like, since the last time we wrote to you, the following additional people have given, when in fact, he never got the first letter. So until you've got this working right, you would say yes as a trial run. However, I'm going to do it no, so I'm actually doing a proper run here. For each of the donors that have given in memory of the deceased or the person celebrating, do you want to output their address with their names? That's up to you. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's not. Of course, if the next of kin gets a list and they don't know somebody on the list, they can always ring you up and say, hey, who's this bloke Murray Neal, can I have his address? I'd like to thank him personally, or something along those lines. We don't want to use the second address file. Yes, we do want to load Word and merge, and you'll probably have a memoriam.doc set up as well. Now that Memoriam file is going to be a little bit like your master receipt letter. It's going to pull in one of two different letters depending on whether it's the first time we've written to them or whether it's the subsequent time. Okay, so we're going to go with that, and yes to begin. So that's now going to go away. It's found 3 next of kin records that it needs to mail to. It's now bringing up our Word document. Okay, so here we have our basic document. Today's date, the name and address field has all of the name and address details about the next of kin. We've got the salutation to the next of kin, and then this bit that comes up in grey is the bit that comes in from a particular letter. Let's do the merge first and see what we get. Okay, so here's one to Mr. Roger Brown, and you can see how it says since the last time we wrote, we've received these donations. So we've obviously written to them before, and now we're sending them a subsequent letter. So there's the list of names: John Begood, Dame Catherine. Let's go to the one that we did. Okay, there's Wilma Blow, another one. Okay, so here's Mr. Ian Sample. Of course, we don't have his address details there, but that's good enough. Dear Mr. Sample, we would like to thank you for your donations we have received in memory of Mr. Fred Sample, your father. So it grabs that bit there, the father bit, from that next of kin record. So that's where you need to make sure that you get that right and you don't put son. And of course this is the deceased person's name. You've got in the period, so we're telling them the period that we're looking at, and here's our 2 records that we put in there. Test company was obviously the one for Audrey Hepburn, and you got Mr. Bill Gates, and that's it. So it's a fairly straightforward process. If we quickly have a look at one of those letters, so if we look at Memoriam, okay, I'm going to have to negotiate my way there. So these would normally reside in your DM work directory, and for the case of the in memoriams, it's called Memlet1 and Memlet2. So there you can see Memlet1, so that's the first letter to a next of kin for someone who's died, and Memlet2 is the second one. However, for anything else, like I think I had birthday set up, I've got birthday 1 and birthday 2. So apart from the in memoriams, everything will be the same as the code that you set up, with the number 1 or the number 2 afterwards. If we have a look at Memlet1, it's simply the basic text there. We've got the deceased title, name, first name and surname, and the relationship, start date, end date, and donor list is that list of however many donors have given in to that particular person. So essentially that's it for the actual in memoriam system. I'm sure there'll be some questions that I'll get at the end, but that's all that I was planning on doing at this stage. So I'm now going to hand over to Gary, who's now going to take you through applying updates.
Thanks, Murray. Good afternoon, everybody. So what we're going to look at quickly this afternoon is periodically, and normally about every quarter, we try and put out an update notice because there's always things changing in the system. There's new things being added, or fields or things like that that are coming along. So when you're in Donman itself, you'll see on the menu here up the top, you've got the actual version number. So that'll tell us where we're currently at the moment. Okay. So when you receive the notice, normally in the email, say that there has been a new update released, the first thing we'd have to do is go and log into the client website. Okay, so you go to your client login, and then you'll get to this home page here. So this is where you can check other things like, you know, the communities and other things that you can have a look at as part of that. But in this case, because I'm doing an update, if I go across to support up the top here, and then product releases, will take me to the page where the product releases are. So in this case, and at the moment, we are doing 2 different update files. One is for people that are currently on the previous version. So in this case, the previous version was 7.508, and this is the update to take that. The second update, which is the full update, will take me from any version, basically from version 5.00 all the way up to 7.509. So it's quite a large file as far as the updates go. But for most of us, if we're up to date, we can select the smaller of the two updates. The process for extracting them is exactly the same. So in this case, it's come up saying, do I want to open the file or save it, whatever it might be. The two options are, if you know that you've done the updates before and you said, okay, look, I know what to do, I can just open it straight away. If not, you can always just do save. And you can see down the bottom of my screen here, where because I'm on Windows 7, that's automatically saving it into my downloads folder. Okay. So I can do that, or if as I was saying, if I've already done the updates before, instead of having to save the file, I can just update, open it automatically. And the programs that normally I'd need to have installed to do the updates and make it much easier for myself to do that would be something like WinZip or 7-Zip, or there's numerous programs out there to handle a zip file, which is really just an archive file, which is a compressed version of a whole lot of other files. Okay, so it just makes it easier to transport and put into there. The advantage being is that when we extract the files, the file dates remain the same. They don't all change to be the current date. So if you are having some technical issue, and we might say, well, can you have a look in your Donman directory and tell me what the date on this file is, will give us a good idea of, are you at the current version or not. Okay. So as you go through, you can see basically, as I said, I've got the two links. It'll show me the date there that the file was released. In this case, it's month, day, and year, not how we'd normally do the dates. Okay. And you can see the size of the file. Okay, so the full update, as you can see, is about 50 megabytes, whereas the smaller update is about 10 for this one. Okay. The size of that will depend, of course, on how many programs are in there, whether we're including, a new help file or something like that, because that will greatly increase the actual size of the file. Every bit of text on here will sort of tell us that we need to do one file or the other. Okay. So at the moment, I can see that's still downloading. So it's getting a bit slow today for some reason. But once I've got that file saved away, so whether you save the file on your desktop or not, doesn't really matter. But as I said, by default, if you're on Windows 7, it will go into your downloads folder. So in this case, I've got a shortcut on my desktop to that. If you don't have that, you can normally get to it by going through My Computer, looking at your settings, and it'll then have downloads. Okay. But because it is the default location that Windows uses, it's a very good idea just to have a link on your desktop, because it saves you trying to find where that is every time you go through. Because otherwise you'd have to go through, go into users, find your user record, and then go to downloads. Okay, so you'll get to the same place, but a lot easier the other way around. Okay, so if I go back and have a look. Okay, so in this case I'm almost there. Okay, so now it's saying that the file has been completed, and I've got an option here to open it. So in this case, that's exactly what I'm going to do. And because on my computer I've got the program called 7-Zip installed, and I've associated zip files with that particular program, just like Word will open a document or Excel will open an Excel file. So you can see it's automatically open that file for me. If I then click on the extract button up the top, by default it's putting the folder that it's opened it from. But if I click on the browse button, go into my computer, okay. So in this case it's my X drive, and that's exactly where I want to put it. So you'll see the two different ways that you might have it on your network will be Donman will be its own drive letter as such, or you may have it where you have Donman, and then you'll have DM Work, DM Train, etc. under that. If you're not quite sure where it is on your network, cancel that for a second. On your desktop, where you've got your shortcut to run Donman, if you right-click on that and then go down to Properties, that will tell you. So in this case here, it's saying my Donman is installed on the X drive, and PFLN is the program that it runs. Okay, and DMWork is my working folder. So in this case, it's indicating that the X drive itself is where I need to extract those files to. Okay, so again, if I go back to extract, so where do I want to extract it to? Choose my X drive. Okay, so it's showing me some of the files there. So we just say OK, and it'll come up saying, look, this program is already in that folder, which is a good indicator that I am going into the right place. Okay? So all I need to do from there is say yes to all, and that will go through and then extract the file. Okay, so you can see in this case I've got an error message on the screen, and I'll wait till this finishes. So these are the ones that we're seeing on the screen at the moment are probably the most two common errors that people get. And what it means is that, oh, in this case, I didn't shut down Donman. And so some of the programs or some of the files in this case weren't able to be overwritten. In this case, the WM32 is actually the menu. So if people, have got Donman open, even if they're not in donors or any of the other programs, you're still using some of the files there. If I happen to be in donors or, appeal selection, etc., different errors on here to say, hang on, there's something wrong. So if I get something like that, make sure that absolutely everybody is out of Donman. Close down and just do the extraction again. Because until I get it to the point, and because I've now done it to the X drive, I've now got that as part of my drop-down list, which makes it much easier. So then if I do OK, yes to all, so in this case, it's gone all the way through the extraction of the files, and there are no errors. So there's every chance that everything's exactly like I want it to be. I can then close down that file, start up Donman again, and you can see at the top of the screen now, it's got the newest version number. And if there are any updates that needed to be applied to my data, that will automatically happen when I log into the system. So that they are just some of the things that come up quite often that people say, oh, I'm not quite sure what happened. I did the update, I got some error messages, but I don't know what to do about them. Unless you can get the file extracted without any error messages, there's going to be some problem. Something somewhere along the line isn't going to be updated. The most common problem, of course, is that people just don't know where Donman is on their network. So as I said, if you right-click on your shortcut, just have a look at the properties. We'll show you exactly where the files need to be extracted to. To see, apart from the actual looking at the version number on the menu itself, when you extract the files and you go back into the Donman directory, for every update that we put out, there is a PDF that will highlight all the changes. In this case, because I've just installed the 7.509 update, it's now got that there. So I can open that up, and that'll show me all the changes or the major changes that are in this particular version. Okay, and that'll go, as you can see, all the way back. Okay, so hopefully that'll make it a little bit easier for people to do the updates and things like that. If perchance you don't have 7-zip or WinZip or one of those particular programs installed on your machine, if you look in your Donman directory, you'll have a utils folder, and in there will be a program something like this, which is 7Z920. In this case, it's a 7-zip version 9.20, and it's the 32-bit version of the installer that you can use to install, or you can download a new one. You can just Google it and download the latest version of the internet. It's a freeware program, so there's no cost associated. And if you're getting older versions of WinZip and you're now updating to newer versions of the Windows operating system like Windows 7 64-bit, then some of those old WinZip programs won't work. It'll just come up with a compatibility error, and you won't be able to use it, whereas this one will sort of keep on going. So anyway, so hopefully that'll help us and help you guys doing the updates for future. Yeah, we'll hand back to Marla now and see if we've got any questions for Murray or myself.
Thanks, Gary, and thanks, Murray. As we mentioned earlier, if you do have any questions, we ask you to enter them in the question pane, and we'll run through them now. So, Murray, there was one question for yourself. It was, is it possible to create multiple next of kin, for instance, partners plus a parent? It's from Louise.
Well, the problem would be that you tie each donation to a particular next of kin record. So if you had, say, 3 or 4 records for the one deceased or whatever the event is, if you tied some donations to one and some to another, nobody's really getting a true picture of the true number of donations that are being given. So to some extent, the answer is probably no. You could perhaps generate the letter, and then if you know that there were 3 or 4 people that you wanted to send it to, you could probably manually change it once you'd done the merge. But within Donman, if you had 4 records, 4 next of kin records, either some will get nothing against them and one will get them all, or they'll be split across it. So I think you'd really have to just do one next of kin and then manually send it to multiple parties.
Okay, thanks, Murray. And one for you, Gary, which I think you touched on, but just to confirm, for Mona, is the latest software update available online to download? So that when was the last update sent out?
Last month sometime. Yes, the one when you go into the website is always the latest one. So when there's a new version, that one will be basically turned off the website. And when you go into that page, it's always going to be the current files.
And so that's 7.5.09. Okay. Great. I hope that answers your question, Mona. That is all the questions we've got for the moment. So we are probably going to finish a little bit earlier. I will stay on the line for another couple of minutes if you will have any further questions that you haven't had a chance to post, and we can follow up with you offline for those. Yes, the next webcast, thank you, Melinda. Our next webcast is in October, and it's on Wednesday again, so we're back to Wednesdays. Wednesday the 30th of October at 2 p.m, and that'll be Eastern Daylight Time. We'll be in Daylight Savings Time by then, so the topic and details will be emailed to you shortly. And of course, if you've got any colleagues that missed today's webcasts or any of our webcasts, we do encourage you to take a look at our website. That's the donman.net.au website, and you'll find all the recordings of our webcasts there under the What's New area. So this one will be up there shortly as well. So that concludes our webcast for today. Thank you, Murray and Gary, for running through both those important topics for us today, and thank you everybody for joining us. And we look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you. Goodbye.
Thanks, Marla. Goodbye, all.
Thank you. Bye.